A question. I'm Cindy Mikey, and I'm General Manager, actually VP of Industry Solutions at Hortonworks, and also responsible for the insurance and healthcare industry. And joining me today is going to be Monique Hessling. Monique and I have actually worked together and known each other for, gosh, almost 15, maybe a little bit longer than that. We both were in the insurance industry, and Monique is still in active roles and so forth. I have an accounting finance background and don't have a slide, about me, but joined Hortonworks about 3.5 years ago and have been focused on the insurance industry and so forth. And Monique has held various CMO, head of underwriting, also head of product development for ACE, Zurich, Mutual of Omaha. Were you also at Allianz? Oh, Aon. And I have worked at Aon and also Insurance Company of the West, which is in California. How many in the room have an insurance industry background? A couple. Okay. On the property casualty, general insurance side or life side? Property casualty, general insurance, life? Okay. Most of the presentation is going to focus on kind of what's going on in the insurance industry and why we refer to this as kind of a risk listening. So I think everybody is very in tune as to what's going on in the world as we look at emerging technology, the usage of real-time data, and the connected world. And the insurance industry is fundamentally changing because what we insure, especially from a general insurance and a reinsurance perspective. And I think, yesterday when Andreas was talking about the impact to Munich Re, and what we just see from, the, new insurance coverages for cyber, the concept of smart cities and buildings, connected life, connected home, smart factories, commercial. How do we actually leverage data? And, the industry has been focused on predictive analytics for since the foundation or the forming of insurance. But I think really where we're headed as an industry is more around preventive analytics. And when I refer to risk listening, that concept is really, how do I look at doing things where I can actually start to prevent an event of happening? We're doing that from wearables with also usage-based insurance. And I know there's a session after this on UBI, but smart home technologies, how do we leverage that information? Then more importantly, it's also the sharing economy, the type of data that we're seeing, the usage of robotics, and so forth. So as everything's connected, and I think one of the big factors here is, as I mentioned, is also cyber risk. And what we're starting, it's actually the fastest growing insurance product that's out there right now, is how do people actually want to share in their cyber risk. So I'm going to go ahead and build this out. But as we look at, how the world is actually reshaping, I just want to throw up a few facts that are out there. And I think I've got one more here. By 2050, we're expected to see over 70% of the world's population moving to the city. Also, the usage of smart cities, how that's actually changing the risk, how it's changing individual lives, people being more connected, wanting more kind of digital-based products, the usage of smart technologies, what's going on around reducing risk. And give you an example, in the city of Las Vegas, and I know this is a U.S. Use case, but we're actually seeing with the Geneva organization, Daimler is involved in this. There's a couple of other organizations. Is how, and the city of Las Vegas actually has a high potential of individuals being involved in car accidents or actually pedestrian accidents. And so when you start to think about how do you reduce the number of accidents by pedestrians, is how can we start to use smart technology to actually enable that? And so these entities are working together to actually embed sensors in the vehicle. We've got sensors in the roads. We have cameras, and all those are connected to actually send alerts. So you look at the autonomous vehicle, and it's also helping the insurance industry out because we've got connected lives and also connected devices that is actually helping monitor and lower the amount of pedestrian accidents in the city of Las Vegas. So the large population that goes there, people, you never know what people are doing, and it's really kind of having an impact. The other aspect is when you look at the underwriting aspect is more data is now available for underwriters to use in actually evaluating a risk. And this data can actually be historical information, but we're also seeing the usage of real-time information and then also the monitoring. And I think one interesting statistic is, and this number's changed drastically, is if you just look at the amount of data that's being generated from connected vehicles, 25 gigabytes per hour. And historically we would see the insurance industry use usage-based insurance, dongles on vehicles. But now that's changing. We actually have organizations that are capturing the data from the connected vehicles and actually looking at how they can use this data to impact insurance. So if you look at traditionally the different types of data sources, and for those of you that aren't familiar with the insurance industry, if you put it in the context of you as a consumer and how do you interact with your insurance company, new types of data that we have. We've got, weather and environment data that we actually use. We look at, historically we would have looked at, 100, 300, 500-year flood models. Those things are so outdated, you can't use that anymore. So insurance companies are saying, how can I use more real-time information to actually help me enhance those catastrophic event models? We're also seeing, companies wanting to use information that's unstructured, that's in their claims notes and diaries. Also, if anyone saw one of the community showcases, Tomas and Monique actually illustrated, how certain activities around aerial drones are being used. In addition to that, there's the catastrophic event data, there's seismic data. We've got organizations that are actually monitoring how the world, where there shakes. We've got, depending upon where you live in the world, actually monitoring the number of earthquakes that happen every minute. And then how does that actually impact who's going to be, maybe given insurance? Is that going to increase the cost? We also have oil and gas companies that are doing different types of, rather than just pumping water into the ground to actually influence the amount of oil that's coming out of the ground, that's actually causing, in certain parts of the world, causing more earthquakes to happen. So that impacts the opportunity for insurance. On the life and health side, the usage of biometric information, that's real-time risk monitoring. And I'll give you some insights on the health side is now we're looking at, rather than curing illnesses, is how do we keep people healthy? And how do we actually leverage that real-time wearable information to look at what types of prescription drugs we're actually giving individuals? Leveraging news feeds. We've got chatbots. And for those of you that aren't in the insurance space, there's about, Monique, keep me honest here, there's about $1 billion a year being spent on investments in insurtech. The challenge with insurtechs is, we're all here, we talk about data lakes and so forth. Some of the insurtechs end up creating data ponds. And so we have to incorporate this data, which is the chatbots is more real-time information. How do I leverage that data? How do I bring it into the enterprise? How do I make usage of that? You've got your call transcripts, you've got cyber threat information. So these data sources really span the entire value chain of insurance, whether it's coming from underwriting, it's coming from risk analysis, feeds into more usage-based insurance products. How do we leverage this data from a claims and analytics? How do we develop new products? How do we interact with customers? And also, how do we look at both data that we have about people, but then also how do we offer new risk offerings around cyber? So one of the things I like to, just from an insurance industry perspective is, as we look at today's world and the new types of data sources that are coming available, and how would you leverage, a data lake and looking at, both your traditional data. Our industry's been, pretty much down here in the dimensional structured data from an analytics perspective. But as an industry, about 15% of our data is actually used because it's structured. All of our other data sits in, unstructured data sources. We have, I think we're probably the first industry to use enterprise content management systems. So we have all these PDF documents. We have photos. We have transcriptions. We've got forms and letters, information. So as when I work with insurance companies, I say, how do you plan? How do you look at using real-time data? And then also, how do you blend that with your traditional data? And this is really where kind of a data lake and data in motion come into play, is think about what data you have available to you today that you're using for analytics, what data do you have available that you're not currently using, and then also start to plan out and look at the real-time data. And those are some of the data sources that we can actually use from a risk listening or a risk monitoring. You'll hear those two terms. They're kind of new to the industry, but it's really starting to impact. So one of the areas where we're seeing sorry for the noise here, is being able to look at the better usage of geospatial information, being able to look at the drone feeds. We actually have a couple of organizations that are using the satellite imagery. I think later you'll see some slides on what we've done from a catastrophic event, being able to use the feedback from that to actually determine the risk. The other aspect is bringing that real-time information in to look at models, supplement it with the real-time data, and then also use the geospatial information to actually, rather than looking at just an individual risk, is looking at data in aggregate. And blending that event data against your policy data so you can actually determine the impact. Couple different use cases is both from a post, I'll take this in the aspect of a weather event and where I'm actually going to have more immediate access. So think of your perspective as a homeowner, being able to determine within hours of an event, or actually being notified by your insurance company about an upcoming event that you may want to move a vehicle to avoid hail, maybe even snow, ice, and being able to look at those event information both from a date, time, and we've got organizations that are actually looking at hail size, looking at the amount of water, the influx, and then overlaying that with geocoded information, and then also being able to take that data and model it against your existing book of business. And this is impactful for a couple of different reasons. One is to help you determine, do I want to write additional risk in this area, or am I overexposed? The other aspect is, how do I deploy claims resources to a specific event? And then also being able to actually simulate, if there's a huge loss event, how much of this is going to be taken from our reserves? How much do we need to decrease our, looking at our surplus? What's the impact to the business? And Monique is going to talk about this in a little bit later. Another element is, and I think this is really an area where we look at the autonomous vehicle of the future, or just connected car, is historically we started out as an insurance industry looking at, with usage-based insurance programs, let's look at estimated mileage. Let's look at the location of where you're parking your vehicle. What's your prior loss history? Have you been involved in accidents? To now moving into kind of a utilization or pay as you drive. So that would be looking at the number of trips that you take, the time of day, the mileage, what's the distance to home, how many miles are you actually driving, to when you look at the device data, is actually looking at, how fast are you accelerating? And Bernard Marr was talking about this yesterday, is, your braking, the cornering, your excess speed, where were you actually driving? But what I find the most interesting is now actually being able to manage how you drive. And we have a few insurance companies in the industry right now that are actually moving towards behavioral rating, taking the data from the connected vehicle and actually influencing through the onboard device in your car how you actually drive. And I'm going to talk about this on the next slide, is you have the opportunity to now bring in, are you driving in safe areas? Looking at what's the traffic within a given city at any point in time. What is the driving behavior of you as an individual? Taking that data from the vehicle, and one is also making you a safer driver. And that's really what the insurance industry wants to do, is make people safer drivers, because that reduces the amount of claims. Now, again, you have to look at society and whether or not we're going to be, willing to do this. But there are certain individuals, and I think also, as technology is becoming more of our lives, is we're actually being able to offer up data. So, maybe you get in your car and you say, I'm going to go from point A to point B today. And the insurance company says, but based upon the conditions that we actually see, and if you want to get premium or pay your premium based upon how you drive that specific day, the insurance company may say, if you went from take route A to C today, that's a safer route for you, and it's going to drive down your premium cost. So there's opportunities to actually leverage that. So how do we look at technology? How do we look at connected cars, connecting into infotainment systems? The other aspect that we're seeing is also from an engagement perspective is, typically you don't interact with your insurance company a whole lot, and insurance companies are trying to figure out what are the better ways to do that, is also being able to leverage this data for additional type of services. So doing more vehicle concierge services, being able to provide, roadside assistance, or also saying, where did I park my car? I know I travel quite a bit, and I'm going, where did I park that car at? And you're going, just being able to send out certain types of reminders coming from the device. The other aspect with the usage of more the real-time data from connected vehicles is actually from a loss optimization perspective. So there's we have a couple of insurance companies that they've taken the data from the vehicle, and they're marrying that up with product recalls from the automotive manufacturers. And so being able to look at that versus you involved in an accident, was this actually a product liability claim versus you as an insured being, having an accident? So you look at, some of the challenges that we've had with the faulty airbags. That is some data that the insurance industry actually started to discover when you start to look at the patterns as to which vehicles were actually having faulty airbag deployments. We've also seen it with certain types of brakes within vehicles, certain types of engine malfunctions. So this is another area of opportunity for the insurance industry, is how do we leverage this data in a more real-time fashion to actually influence and change the behavior inside the insurance company as well. One of the other areas as we look at kind of like property risk and damage is, how are we leveraging drones? There's, starting to see more and more usage of, using it for risk inspection, being able to look at, roofs, looking at, the buildings, being able to do site surveys. Because one of the other aspects is when you send out a safety consultant for a very large commercial, is many times you can't get them to a location to actually do the inspection. So we're seeing drones being used to go to the very tallest areas of a building. You might be going into a construction site and leveraging that information for actually doing your risk assessment. The other aspect is around catastrophic events, looking at hurricanes, looking at hail inspection, looking at the floods, fires, and then also a couple of areas in agricultural or crop insurance is actually verifying if somebody has a crop claim, is actually using a drone and flying over and saying, do we actually have a decrease in what the crop was? Because typically you would say, was there actually a hailstorm that caused that claim? Was it actually due to lower amount of water volume, or rain? So that impacted the crop production. I'm going to give you one example, and then Monique's going to come up. There's an insurance company that's a global P&C company. I find this one pretty interesting in they insure the biomed industry. So really you look at the drug manufacturers, other type of avenues. And it's kind of a when you have a drug manufacturer that you may end up with a high potential, well, there's a potential of having, adverse drug effects on individuals. So what they wanted to do was actually look for early warning indicators as to whether or not their insureds were actually going to have a product liability claim. So they started to think, what are the types of data sources that we can actually use to help us evaluate if we've got a large loss? Because typically a product liability around a biomed can be, very simple to something that may cost you, 50 to 80 to 100 billion dollars. And so they said, let's start looking at data sources such as news feeds, looking at the customer's website, doing stock and financial analyst information on their companies. And they did this for their top 50 customers that were high risk. And as they were doing this, and this is kind of how their POC started, they said, this is beginning to give us some pretty insightful information. This is not something that you historically would have seen an insurance company do on an ongoing basis. You typically, get your insurance policy once a year, you underwrite it, you may do your renewal and so forth. But this was a way to actually monitor the risk throughout the life cycle of the policy. So in 2016, they expanded this to look at their top 1,000 customers. And they found that the data was so insightful from these 1,000 customers that they now expanded it, and they're monitoring over 50,000 both customers and target customers to actually determine whether or not they would do an adverse risk selection, because they found that there was no other data source in the marketplace that they could buy this data from. And it was all through real-time data that they themselves could actually go out and harvest. And Monique, I'm going to have you, wherever it works for you. Okay.
Thank you, Cindy. Otherwise you guys have to stare at my back. This is not working, is it? I just yell at you? It works. First of all, I think Cindy did make a mistake by putting the words smart city and Las Vegas in one sentence. And that was odd. And if anybody has ever been there, you would know where there are more pedestrian accidents there than in most other cities, because people go to the party and they're drunk early in the morning and they throw themselves in front of cars, and that's normally not a very positive thing. So having said all of that, I wanted to run you through some lifetime examples, real examples that we worked on. These are on the Cinoscope solution. They could run on other technology too. I just want to show to you what happened in the insurance market recently and what we have been working on. So the first one is a telematics analytics example. And what I will do, remove my glasses, because I'm multitasking with the glasses thing. On the left upper tile, you see an actual picture of a location. In the middle is a so-called word wall, and what that word wall does, in orange of the selection that I took, which is the information in the middle lower tile, it shows you which words are prevalently overrepresented in the sample that I took compared to the whole set. In gray, it's an underrepresented thing. So if we look at the words, words like limousine were underrepresented in the example that I took. But other words that you see in orange were overrepresented. And then to go from the left on, we take a still view from the car's dash cam, so that's actually a picture. Through machine learning, I'm not reading all of it to you, but you get the feeling for it. We understand the context of the location. We show the driver behavior and speed in this specific situation. And we look at the conditions of the road surface, because one of the issues that insurance carriers up till this point have been running into is that they calculate your behavior based on specific behaviors: braking, swerving, hard braking, swerving, acceleration. There are normally between 5 and 12 of them that they use. But your context, of where you are, defines if that's something actually good or bad behavior, right? I might do a really hard brake. I live close to Philadelphia. Again, must be me. People throw themselves in front of their cars regularly, in front of my car regularly there. It's a pedestrian behavior in the beautiful city of Philadelphia. The world is better off if I brake hard there, right? If I would think about my insurance premium and softly brake, would be bad for certain people. So So we need to take that context into consideration, which we do here. We show the geolocation, we do pictures with it, which sometimes explains why people are behaving in the way that they do, and it will help us much more accurately price risks. For example, speed bumps, people tend to brake for them. Not bad behavior, but you get dinged up till we could do this thing in your insurance premium kind of stuff. So this is one example of how we use different data sources in different formats and different types to help underwriters understand better the actual risk of you or me. And specifically in telematics, that is critical because, as we just discussed, the context, but also because every one of us, it seems to be human behavior, feels that we're a better than average driver, which obviously statistically is not reasonable, right? I do these sessions on telematics regularly. I was in a crowd with a little bit over 1,000 people not too long ago, and I asked them, who of you guys and ladies thinks they're a better than average driver? About 100% of the men raised their hand, and about 80% of the women raised their hand. Well, that's obviously not true. So it helps people understand your actual behavior better. How do I do this, Cindy? I just click on it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or use the
I
remote.
do not just click on it. Take the next one.
Got it.
Okay, we have another one. This is a personal line insurer. This is actually data from the Netherlands, as you can see, where we correlated all accident data with vehicle types, weight of vehicles, brand of vehicles, and then with locations on the other side. And it helped us figure out we can drill down on each one of those variables that I just mentioned, like vehicle type, vehicle weight, type of vehicle, brand of vehicle, and location to provide, again, the context, because some locations have just happened to be more accident prone than others for many reasons. And we could drill down on any one of those variables. And in this case, we noticed that besides that certain type and ages and weights of cars are more accident prone than others, we also learned that timing, of course, timing of the day and weather circumstances were very critical. And we could prove that when sun was in the eyes of people, which I know doesn't happen too often in the Netherlands, but occasionally it does, there were much more road accidents on these specific locations than others. You will wonder, what do we actually do with that data? It doesn't help after the accident, of course. It doesn't help insurers do anything after you're already in an accident because you didn't see. But it helps in city planning, and it helps provide input on how to do certain things, windows of cars, city planning better than we did before. So collectively, the whole ecosystem found this a very useful finding because we could prove it out in this case, and we could actually prove out what the differences were between no sun and sun. But it's not easily implementable the next day. Another one that we did was images. People like images. Images are good things. This is one on the hurricanes. I spoke about it earlier this morning. We did a lot of work on hurricanes recently. If you see the lower left corner, you see flooded country. You see it on the right corner too. These are satellite pictures that you see on the top end of a hurricane that were actually done the moment that they were released, which was within 20 minutes after the actual timestamp of it. And we use those to help drive insurers better understand their activities. And I will show you how we did that. What we did, you see in the left upper corner, you see now like a tile of what I showed you one slide before. But what we did here is we overlaid this with insured risks for the insurer. We overlaid it with drones. As Cindy just said, drones are being used a lot now in natural catastrophe environments. You see the pictures on the right. And we overlaid them with the height of water, water damage, water levels, and wind speeds. And the reason for that is, as we shared this morning, if people were in our sessions, that on a lot of personal lines policies, homeowner policies in the United States, wind damage is always insured. Water damage, flood damage, normally not. And there is a gray area in the middle that if wind and water happens at the same time, gets a bit confusing. So what carriers with insurers want to do, they want to know, preferably before sending out highly paid engineers, if a risk might be insured or not. So they want to know at the same time, was the water first in your home, and came the wind like half a day later, or the other way around, because it drives if they will ultimately have to pay or not. So now the two outlying scenarios are actually fairly easy. Water was there a lot first, there was no wind, there was just water, you are not insured. Tough luck, right? Or there was a lot of wind that damaged your home and there was not water. Good case scenario, they will pay your claim. It's probably not going to be a very difficult loss situation. The middle scenarios can get ugly because there are like there are very strict rules on when to pay or when not to pay. So that's why they normally get heavily involved with claims departments and that's why they see fraud and things like that. So it was very critical for them to know, was the wind first, was the water first, and in which specific location, and back that up with pictures to prevent having to send out hundreds of claims adjusters to an area that was not accessible for quite some time after the event. This was the last year used, I think it was Irma hurricanes. So these are some of the examples that we have been working on with insurers on bringing together multiple different types of data to gain insights that help them either underwrite better and more specific or adjust claims better, and then hopefully, as we saw in the sun and the eye example, get to more preventative measurements soon, which would be obviously the best result out of everything we do on risk listening. With that, I'm handing it back to Cindy.
Thanks, Monique. And just a couple more slides. So a couple of different elements, and I've talked about the one in the middle. The actual insurance company referred to that program as their brand watch. So what companies are they actually watching? But there's a couple other scenarios here. And the first one is really, it's around a global reinsurer, and it's not Munich Re, is actually monitoring all types of information coming from news stations around fires. This was specifically in the UK, also in the US. They've expanded now into Asia, and then they've also in southern EMEA, actually monitoring and looking at additional data along with weather to actually help them better understand some of the catastrophic events. So looking at fire, looking at the amount of moisture that's falling to determine whether or not they should change their risk evaluation. And then the other aspect was a insurance company in South Africa that actually offers micro insurance to small farmers. A lot of times that you in South Africa and in these areas, there's no insurance available. So how do they actually make insurance products available to an individual? And they're actually monitoring weather data. They're also allowing them to do mobile money transfer at specific times. When do they actually want to have coverage? So it's kind of an agricultural policy for kind of a just-in-time insurance, but they're also collecting other data. So, and that's based upon more real-time streaming information. So one last slide to summarize is, how should the insurance industry actually prepare for insurance in a connected world? Because, gosh, we're in an industry that's been in existence for 350 years, and it's kind of hard to change our culture. But really what we see is, being able to actually look and track at emerging technology, actually look at becoming involved in some of the smart city initiatives that are going on in the world, actually looking at more data sources in Europe. You've got several new data sources that are out there through the governments and through the cities that is more streaming information, bringing in crime data, additional weather information. Those are some very insightful data sources that you can actually use. There's also certain data sources around healthcare that are also available. And actually to be more involved, join some of the consortiums that are out there that bring in from the local governments, coming from the smart cities through the connected vehicle programs, and then also continuing to build out big data and analytics capabilities. And then also leveraging this data. So it's, we talk about the monetization of data. For the insurance industry, there's certain aspects of that, but we're actually seeing new products being designed by the insurance industry. Bernard talked about this yesterday, and the one insurance company that, is fundamentally changing the type of insurance that's being offered. And more of the usage-based insurance. You've got the sharing economy. That's fundamentally changing how, like if you look at Airbnb, how organizations are, when is that a homeowner's policy? And when does that turn to a commercial risk? And you may not want to always have, if participate in Airbnb, you may not always want to have a commercial insurance policy for an entire year. So when do I turn the policy on? When do I turn the policy off? So those are some of the new things that we can use and also be more in tune with kind of a real-time world for insurance. On that, any questions? Yes. So there's different ways. So I've seen insurance companies either try to set up their own device management program, or they actually partner. And it's kind of a the insurance industry is like, what's your core competency? And I'm seeing more organizations do the partnering with organizations that actually provide those capabilities, and then actually asking and gathering that data from the smart home organizations. But it kind of varies. I think the one challenge for the insurance industry is when you look at the device manufacturers, many of them don't understand the one and O's that come off of the devices. So you need somebody from the device manufacturer to actually interpret that information. And I would say probably of the insurance companies I work with, which is probably about 100 around the world, probably 95% of them are partnering. There's just a handful. But then there's also some organizations that aren't yet to the point of, using the data. They're like, I'll give you a discount because I know that you're monitoring. And that's right now we're probably 75% of the people are actually doing just giving you a discount, where others are actually aggregating the information. And again, when you start to look at that information, there's one insurance company I'll give you. It's a good one. Is they insure churches. Churches sit idle usually 6 days a week. And so they have what they call their connected church offering. And they've actually partnered with a division of Munich Re that actually does all the devices and installs them. And they're looking for, when you look at why did they do that, most claims in churches happen because of water damage, leaky pipes, which fundamentally are frozen pipes in the winter. So they thought, well, let's just do a device on the pipes. No, you also have to monitor the temperature. So you have to look at the cause and effect. And so from an insurance industry perspective is to really effectively deploy IoT to get to preventive is let's do the due diligence, let's do the historical analysis, let's look at the claims information, what was the cause of loss, and then deploy IoT in those specific areas. And I think sometimes the insurance industry are like, hey, that's the latest, coolest thing, let's just go do it. But you need to actually say, let's look at the reason for the loss cause. So. Any other questions? Yes. There's a couple different theories. When we first saw usage-based insurance come out, is typically people that would opt in to install a dongle on your vehicle were usually your safest drivers already, because they were the ones that wanted to share their information. So there's kind of two different theories on this, but what we're actually seeing is, as we move into more the connected car, that's really where the opportunity is. And a lot of people installing a dongle, those are numbers in US dollars, were about $300 to install a dongle, and people of that nature typically switch insurance companies on an annual basis. There's not one insurance company that typically makes $300 on an average policy on any given year, because usually auto insurance typically operates at about a 95% or 95 to a 97% combined ratio. So for every dollar you bring in, 97 cents is going out. So it was difficult for them to cover the cost of the dongle. So now as we move to the newer technology around mobile apps or the connected vehicles, we're starting to see this as a new alternative. But I'll tell you, when we look at the connected world, and this is what's happening, and it's kind of a competitive threat for the insurance industry, certain areas of the world, when you buy a vehicle now or you lease a vehicle, it's coming the cost of the car, the insurance. And so that's either the car manufacturer is actually providing that insurance. So we now have competitive, non-traditional competitive threats to the insurance industry. So I don't think I really addressed your question, but there's a lot of new things that are influencing, it's not just your traditional insurance company anymore. Yeah. In certain elements, but I mean, it depends upon the philosophy of the insurance company that, if you can start to share some of that information and actually bring down your loss costs, there's the opportunity to do that. And I think it depends upon which countries. I'm actually seeing a lot of things going on in, like in Dubai and Saudi Arabia, where they have it's interesting where the information sharing is actually happening to actually have better roads. In fact, the government is actually saying, what can we do with the insurance industry to help bring down our accident rates? So. Right. So, well, thank you, everyone. I know many of you stayed longer, so thank you.